This is Willpower.
Beautiful. It is such a day here with Jennifer Scheinman to talk all things skincare and longevity, cellular health. And I could not be more excited because I know that there's so many men, and we have lots of women listening into this episode. So welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I wanted to open just giving a little inspiration from your journey and really asking you about the baseline things in your life that either may have happened or inspired you to sort of walk the path into this dietitian, nutritionist landscape at a level where you're really digging deep into the expertise of cellular aging.
Yeah, well, I've always been I was a biology nerd. Like I was in high school, I think my favorite class was bio, and I always knew that I wanted to be somewhere in the life sciences arena. So I sort of entered nutrition a little bit haphazardly. I was actually studying to be a veterinarian in college, and quickly learned I didn't like blood. And so was always interested in healthy eating and kind of going through some issues with, college weight gain and all of that. I got really into nutrition and was like, this is a job? This is so cool. But my path even in nutrition has really changed a lot. I think traditional dietetics, I'm almost 50 years old. So traditional dietetics in the late 90s and early 2000s was very much, calories in, calories out. It didn't really, quality of food wasn't quite as important as just, your base macros. And it wasn't really until I had sort of my own journey with health that I sort of discovered integrative and functional nutrition and integrative and functional medicine and this recognition about cellular health and, even thought about the mitochondria again, right? I had learned just the Krebs cycle and quickly forgot everything else about the mitochondria. So it was really just my own personal journey with my passions that has kind of gotten me to this place where I really am dedicated not only for myself, but the women that I work with on just helping us optimize our cellular nutrition, our health, so we can thrive in midlife and beyond.
Yeah, beautiful. And when you talk about sort of functional and integrative nutrition, I just want to unpack that a little for the audience because there's a lot of, I come from a background of like going when my father was very ill, going into the hospital and being like, oh, the dietitian is coming in. This is going to be great. And then just being in the landscape as a biohacker, as someone who works with nutrition with so many clients, I saw all of the things going on in sort of the world of our traditional hospital system. And I don't want to that's a whole other podcast in and of itself. But just like from that sort of baseline where the ingredients that were coming to the patients were just so not well thought out and forced into this tiny little budget is what I've sort of come to understand in the way that hospitals work. But also just like watching the evolution in the last 10 years of what is happening and how you've seen it. So I just want to sort of have you unpack this integrative and functional nutrition component, just really letting people know how things have changed.
Yeah. And so in my view, my own sort of personal journey, I think also resonates what's happened in the world. Like they, to your point, like people in the hospital get fed things like Ensure and, hospital food is probably some of the worst quality food ever. And it is, again, from this focus of just calories, protein, fat, and macros, and micros as well, but not necessarily thinking as much about like the quality of the food and what that's doing to our body in terms of like systemic inflammation, in terms of our gut health and how we digest and absorb nutrients. I mean, I remember even learning in school, it's like embarrassing to say, GI health, like didn't really matter what you ate, right? There was no specific dietary intervention for people with GI issues. And now it's like, well, of course there should be. That's like your first line where food touches your body and gets digested and absorbed. So when I think of like integrative and functional nutrition, I think of it from the lens of like every molecule within the food that you eat has an opportunity to either nourish and help you and, or potentially not be the most healthy thing that you can do. And then again, for me personally, also, I think though, the like social aspect and cultural aspect and pleasure aspect of food all have to come into that as well. And that's also very healing and nourishing in a different way. And then, one of the things I think that's evolved too in the functional nutrition space is also this, using supplements where appropriate, right? Unfortunately, most people aren't getting everything that they need from diet alone for a million reasons. Quality of food, just the way that life has evolved. And so layering on, dietary supplements where appropriate to either fill gaps or next level up where people are trying to achieve their health goals.
Yeah, so supplements are it's a rabbit hole. This is why it's nice that we can have some conversation around the timeline, longevity, and skin supplements, because that rabbit hole sometimes, and I've spoken about this before on the podcast, is, people are going to Amazon, people are going to Whole Foods, people are going to random grocery stores, drugstores, CVS, and they're just like, I'm going to pick the thing that's like moderately priced, or maybe even the most expensive thing in CVS, but like it's still not really, when people are unpacking supplements and actually testing. I've had Sean Wells on the podcast, and it's just like so many supplements are being fairy dusted. So many of them are not containing what they say or have next to none of what they say. And it's just, it's so critical that people begin to understand, if we are going to supplement, taking care of yourselves, but also not choosing the cheapest supplement, really, having a wise conversation with yourself about the budgets and the needs that you have. I don't know how you classify supplementation, but I classify it quite often as like the must-haves, where we're correlating it to blood work or challenges that are really presenting themselves, sleep, other things like that we'll talk about as we go along in the podcast. But then, so having the must-haves on lockdown, and then there's nice-to-haves, and then there's the like biohackery last 10%, and where those things fit in, right? People are taking NAD and so on and so forth. Things just keep going and going. So, we can get very expensive, and all the peptides and everything people are doing. So it's like finding the tried and true answers. And the reason I'm excited about having this conversation as it pertains to sort of skin as well is understanding that just like supplementation, and when we go to the store, we look at Amazon or we go to CVS, the stuff that is on the shelves is just, more often than not, it is not actually helpful for our skin and for our longevity, at the very least from an absorption standpoint. But there's so much more we kind of unpack. So I want to shine the light on sort of the piece of skin and longevity, because as you're working with Timeline, and we can talk about sourcing, but as you're working with Timeline, it is like well efforted to be able to create things that actually work, right? And things that actually work do cost money. So I'm wondering if you can unpack a little bit of sort of like the skincare philosophy at Timeline, and how you're looking at this type of nourishment, this type of nutrition for, health longevity at a cellular level, which is then bolstering skin.
Yeah. So, you've been so many critical points that I think are worth just reiterating for a sec before we dive into that, because, we're spending our hard-earned money on a lot of different things, whether it's for our skin, whether it's for supplements, and we are not always doing our due diligence and our homework to look at like the quality of what that is. And I think it's so much more impactful to spend on a few really quality things than it is to spend little on lots of things, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It's been at least 25 years, getting probably closer to 30 years that I've been a registered dietitian. And the dietary supplement industry is like the Wild West in terms of claims that people can make. And what I've learned since working with Timeline and now getting really, brought up to speed in skin, which like I am a big skincare junkie and guilty myself in the past of not really doing my homework, is skin is like almost even the bigger wilder west in terms of, I could formulate something in my kitchen, give it to you, and you could say you like it. And then I'm like, clinical studies show that this improves skin wrinkles or whatever the claim is. So, I think that consumers and outside of just even skin and nutrition is just reaching out to the companies that you are interested in purchasing stuff from and asking them, like, where do these claims come from? Can you prove that you're sustainable, that you're this, that you're that? And companies that are very proud of the work that they've done will be very transparent in that. And companies that maybe ignore you or give you the runaround is maybe not the place that you want to spend your money. So that's just sort of my 2 cents. And then, Timeline itself, like we are founded as a Swiss company, which is just, known for meticulous science. And the whole idea started with nutrition was to bring these like bioactives that are in nature around us and to put almost like a biotech approach to the science behind them. And so what that means is almost like pharmaceutical grade studies, right? Where we are understanding what is this molecule? What does it do inside the body? What is the appropriate dose to elicit a response? What is that response? Is it safe? All of those things. And that same level of science went to skin as we started to develop our topicals as well. And really doing science that we just don't see very often in the skincare industry, which is pretty exciting to me. And honestly, that's why I joined Timeline, is they're really raising the bar on how supplements and skin are researched and marketed. And it's just such a fresh breath of fresh air, and something that I hope really changes the industry.
And what are you seeing out there? This is the thing too. It's like, I see so much out there that even for me, as someone who researches, as someone as obviously I'm very cautious in general across the landscape of what ingredients and what sourcing is happening in everything, from the food I eat to the supplements I take to the people I have on the show, right? I know Timeline for years now. And so this is why I'm like, okay, it's a beautiful opportunity to have this conversation so more people can find out about it. But what are you seeing, just, we don't have to name any names, but like from other companies as examples of things that are happening in skincare and other brands, other companies, and just the industry as a whole that are like the big negative Nancy's, I want to say, like the big call outs, right? Like a esthetician had a conversation about like collagen. And like, people are like throwing pounds of collagen and spending hundreds of dollars on collagen supplements a month. And it's not to say that collagen can't help in some ways, but that there's so many different strains, and that we're overblown the marketing of like, if you just drink boatloads of collagen every single day, I get hit with all these ads on Instagram, then you're just going to stay like young and fruitful and gorgeously skinned for the rest of your life. And that's such a gross exaggeration. And I want to have you share some of the things that maybe you're seeing in topical skincare that parallel that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the worst offender is just, honestly, if it seems too good to be true. Like there are times that, and I think when we are in a place where there's like AI that is altering images of things, right? Like I'll constantly in my feed, I'll see things like these before and afters. I'm like, there is no way that happened. Like there's just no way that you rubbed this cream on and like, you see it, right? It's like, look at the forehead and it's gone smooth. Like that is definitely photoshopped or, some sort of AI in there. And I think, most of us are sort of good judges of that and kind of that gut check. Like if your first instinct is like, oh my God, that looks miraculous, chances are it's probably not. Yeah. I think the other thing is, a lot of times, and this is not the case for Timeline, although we do this, but like slapping on these like scientific terms that sometimes go a bit above people, the layperson, and they think like clinically tested, clinically validated, targets this, targets that. It can be really confusing. That's why I'm glad I'm here and can kind of talk a little bit about cellular health from a skin lens and, what really like Mitopure is doing, under the hood in terms of what's happening on the skin. But I think some of these scientific terms can be a little overwhelming and grib credibility where they're maybe not necessarily.
Yeah. I know other watch outs, like I kind of try to talk to people about like looking for big fragrance and looking for things that are, a lot of skincare brands are claiming like peptides all of a sudden because that's the hot word, right? They're like, well, we got peptides in here. And it's like, well, the question is it passing through the skin barrier? Like that's always the molecule piece and the size of the molecule and what we can take in for our skin. So I know that there's a combination of both topical and, like a nutraceutical supplement that you can take with Timeline. But are there any like big watch outs or keys to what topically can work for skin and how much we absorb so that people sort of have some understanding of that?
You are absolutely correct. And to be honest, though, I don't know the answer to that, right? Like certain peptides do different things. There's also, and this is sort of the same in nutrition, right? There's a certain level that actually is needed to be active, right? And to actually be able to do its job. Unfortunately, skin doesn't label necessarily like how much of an active is on there. So like a nutrition label should at least, unless it's a proprietary blend, should tell you like how many milligrams or micrograms or whatever is in there. And skin is not really the same way. So unfortunately, it's really hard to do that homework. I think good practices in terms of like fragrance and dyes and potentially harmful ingredients are using things like the Environmental Working Group or their Skin Deep, or Yucca is another app where at least you're not getting harmful stuff in there as well.
Just to reiterate for people who are listening, EWG.com, I think is that Environmental Working Group. And then they rank things like level of toxicity or like good or bad on the range. And I see sometimes too with some of these things that I think that there are some things that are all natural, completely like from the farm, tallow or whatever, that they can help with moisture and like dry lips and things like that. But there's a lot of other claims going on there as well. And I'm just not quite sure that although there's simplicity in that and people can do what they want, I'm not quite sure that there's not a call for some things need to be sort of either catalyzed or made in a lab and organized in a way that is actually going to be able to be absorbed and be taken into the body. So I think that's an important shout out too, because you might see something super clean on EWG and that's great. And it might not be doing the service to your skin. If you're like in your 20s, then okay, maybe, but it's not doing the service to your skin as it's aging. It
is a challenge. I wish I had like a really good answer other than just connecting with brands and asking them like what's in there. And I get that that's, a bit of homework. Or obviously, people build trust with their, with podcasters like yourself and educators and coaches and doctors. And that's not always means that everything that they recommend is great. But at least, when you build trust with somebody, then, they have a personal experience with it, hopefully, and can share. And that bring people, like I said, like myself on to really explain what's really happening with the products. So
totally.
It's a challenge. It's a lot easier in the nutrition world for sure, because even though it is still challenging there, right? But
labels are a bit more like forced. They have to do specific things on labels and they can't make all the claims in the world. So that's
exactly. You do have the FDA at a certain level, like just evaluating false claims, and it's not as much, I think, in skin. Yeah.
Yeah. So shall we talk a bit about Mitopure, this specific ingredient that you all have?
Yeah.
In your products and like what it's doing at a cellular level, right? Because the skin, I imagine you would agree that, cellular health becomes skin health. They're very, very closely associated. So maybe just unpacking that and having a little discourse about what Mitopure is, because I think it's a really interesting element, and not very few people have heard of it.
Well, I think the reason people haven't heard about it is so the key ingredient Mitopure is basically our branded version of a molecule called urolithin A, which I get is a mouthful, urolithin A. And there is tons of research, over 15 years of research, understanding this molecule. And a lot of that was spearheaded by the parent company of Timeline. But I think because there wasn't like a dietary supplement or a skin line or a product that you could use with marketing dollars behind it, people weren't really hearing much about it. And so now that's all changed. And so what Mitopure or urolithin A is, I think the first thing, like I'm sure your audience is super familiar with the role of, the critical importance of gut health. We were talking about that a little bit before, but one of the things that our microbiome does for us is they actually take things that we can't digest and absorb, like fibers and certain polyphenols, and they actually convert that into molecules that we can use. I often joke that we give them room and board. They get to live inside our gut, and they get to eat the things we can't digest, and then they pay us with these molecules, which are, any of your gut savvy listeners probably are familiar with, like short chain fatty acids, vitamin K, and certain B vitamins are postbiotics. And urolithin A is this type of molecule. So the simplest sort of explanation is like you don't necessarily get it directly from food. You are relying on your gut to make it. And most of us don't have the right gut microbiome to make that. So that's sort of the story of where it comes in nature. And then it's
urolithin A, was it first found in pomegranate? Is that so? Or maybe not first found, but that's like it is a robust amount.
Yeah.
It like 19 pomegranates or something.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. So the polyphenols are specifically called oligotannins, and pomegranates are one of the richest sources of that. And so the founders of Timeline, as I had mentioned earlier, were trying to like really identify these, odd bioactives that are in food and nature. And so they were really trying to understand the pomegranate because it is so nutrient dense and full of rich of so many different vitamins, minerals, and plant compounds. And so I think this is such a cool story. They were looking at, they fed a couple of these different bioactives that are in pomegranates, and then also this postbiotic urolithin A, which they actually thought was a waste product. They didn't really think like there's anything special about this. And they were doing this with a top mitochondrial researcher, and they fed these different elements to worms. And the worms that were fed urolithin A lived, I believe it was like 45% longer.
Wow.
And that was all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, what is this molecule? Because when we look at lifespan extension, the only other thing that is just slightly ahead of that is caloric restriction. I think that has about a 47% lifespan expansion in worms. So it got people really, really excited. And so from there, it was sort of like, forget everything else that's in the pomegranate. Let's focus on this nutrient and see what it does. And from there, there's been just 15 years of research all the way up from worms and now into humans, demonstrating, most importantly, its safety, but secondly, its efficacy, both when you take it internally and when you apply it topically.
Yeah, and so it's the key ingredient in the supplement that you have.
Correct.
And the key ingredient in the topical as well.
Correct.
There are other things in the topical, the day cream or the night cream, that are, actively supporting the process of healthy aging skin.
For sure. So the real secret sauce in the skin, though, is the urolithin A. So we did extensive research on Mitopure, specifically in a cream based, and our clinical trials that looked at inducing this cellular turnover called mitophagy, the turnover of the mitochondria. That's really how Mitopure works, both whether you're taking it internally or topically. So that's really where you're getting a lot of like the wrinkle reduction. You're getting all of the benefits of the genes that turn on collagen organization and assembly. They're all upregulated. You also have this really nice resiliency to photo damage, the damaging effects of the sun. So that's the secret sauce in skin. But in order to really make an entire skincare line, so there's a serum, a day cream, and a night cream, we did put other tried and true actives in there as well, so that it could be a robust line, and you don't have to use other things. So each product has a little bit of a different formulation. So like the serum is really meant to be lightweight and super absorbing. You would apply that first on clean skin, and it's meant to be kind of like tightening and lifting. So there is in there, I believe there's like a little bit of caffeine, but there's some peptides that we were talking about before. The day cream is meant to be very glowy and moisturizing. So there's niacinamide, which is just a very well-studied ingredient for supporting cellular health in the skin. There's some antioxidants in there. And then the night cream is this like thick, luxurious, ultra hydrating night cream with something called nopal flower extract, which is like a very, very gentle exfoliator, almost like a very gentle alpha hydroxy. And so you can put that on night, but you won't have any of like the irritation that you might have with like a more traditional alpha hydroxy night cream.
Yeah, and the texture of all of them, it's pretty incredible. The serum is really lovely. And someone told me years ago, like serum always goes on first. I don't think I always knew that, but it's sort of nice to have the whole standalone kit, because then you can just utilize the ingredients that are there, or the topicals that are there, and feel like, okay, I have my skincare routine on lockdown, versus the thing which is like, long gone are the days of me having like drawers of different things, being like, what goes on which, where first? I don't know, all of that. As I said, like I am a bit of a skincare junkie, and, as a dietitian, the science behind the dietary supplement, I would take Mitopure even if I didn't necessarily feel something, right? Like I don't feel my magnesium working. Like there's people who tell me like, I take magnesium and it feels great. Like I don't feel magnesium when I take it, but I know I'm probably not getting enough in my diet. I don't feel my vitamin D take. But I wouldn't use a skincare product, I don't care what the science said, if I wasn't seeing an actual benefit in my own personal skin. And I recognize that I work for the company, so I'm, this might come across as slightly jaded, but I am, 49 years old. I don't think my skin has ever looked better. And I've stopped using so many other products. To your point, I had this whole like 10-step skincare routine, and I was like, what's this peptide? What's this hyaluronic acid? I don't know what this is doing. And as those like products ran out and I sort of held off on buying new stuff, my skin still continues to look better and better and better. And so I'm like, I don't know why I'm buying all of this junk when I can just have a few super quality ingredients and still get the same results. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important, is to sort of stick with what you know, learn and understand it, and then be able to like apply it and have it and, show up every month, make the investment in yourself and your health. And especially with like, navigating, societal expectations and all the pressures that are put on us. And this is not it's not about men against or versus women. It's just, there's a lot of, in the aging landscape, we're just starting to have more conversation around perimenopause and menopause. We're having more conversation around, skin health and aging well. And I just think that there's a societal piece that's like, women are getting, I don't know if you just saw this, Demi Moore was just in this movie, and it was like, it was beautiful. And it was also like, painful to see in the way that they sort of highlight one of the main male characters, that he's like so gross and he's like old and he's like, he's doing all that, he's just eating, and it's like beautiful camera work, with beautiful cinematography. And then also this this deep knowing that I have as a woman, that I watch sort of the evolution of powerful females, and there are many doing it well, but there's also a lot of this like societal pressure to stay young, look young, feel fit, whatever. And I think, people are doing a lot of drastic things to what they look like in the mirror versus just aging gracefully. I'm not shunning utilizing other things, right? Injectables, whatever. They all have their place, and that's beautiful. And it's the same thing as we kind of talked about earlier. It's like no one who's listening to this show is probably eating McDonald's, but like we have to know if we're having, spiking our glucose all day long and eating a lot of like pizza. And again, you are like me, I believe, like we're not here to shame people. Like have the neurochemical bliss cascade of eating a meal with someone that they home cooked, and maybe it's not everything you ever dreamed from a nutritional standpoint, but you're with people in community. It's great. But the similar thing with like skincare is like if you're doing all the extras and you're putting a lot of toxicants and fragrance and shit on your skin because you think L'Oreal is the answer, plus your Botox or whatever, like it's not quite cutting it. It's like, well, how do we start with the nutrition and how do we start with the skincare that's really doing us a service before we make considerations for what comes next?
Yeah, so beautifully said. And that movie is on my watch list because I've been told that I will really enjoy it, and just kind of what they're really getting at there. But
yes, and it's dark. So for anyone who's listening, because I can't even remember the name. Do you remember the name of it?
She just won an award for it. No, my menopause brain cannot remember the name of it. So,
but they it's dark. Like I don't know if you saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. There's like a little bit of like beauty and life and bittersweetness to it, and there's the same with this film.
Yeah, and I think to your point also, right? We hold this sort of unrealistic standard. I mean, Demi Moore is like in her 60s, right? And like, I mean,
she looks freaking fantastic.
Yeah, but I think we also have to remember, like, it sort of is her job to look amazing, right? And to work out probably regularly with a trainer and probably watch every little thing that she puts in her body, and probably, spends more time and money on her skincare, including invasive procedures, than most of us have. And, I think how we age is just all, our own narrative. And I think, the couple things, like, I think on the one hand, like I feel 49, I feel better than I felt in, a long time. Like I've been really investing in my health. I had chronic Lyme in my early 40s. And, so part of me is also like, I want to look as good as I feel. Right. And I think that that's okay. And I think the other thing that's important when we think about skincare and skin health is we think so often about skin as just like aesthetics, but let's not forget that skin is actually an organ and it has a job, and it is a reflection also of your health. I had actually read an article, a scientific paper, I want to say it was like a year or two ago, where they were saying that some of the like inflammation that happens in the skin, like that is a sign that there is inflammation other places in the body. And our skin is one of the first places that we start to see aging. So, not that we all need to be walking around wrinkle free and, with perfect clear glass skin, but that our skin is a reflection of our health, right? If you think of like smokers or, people who drink heavily, their skin, they wear it on their skin, right? Stress, you wear that on your skin. And so I think there is a point that skin health needs to be part of a total wellness plan, even in the absence of just the aesthetic piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. If we're speaking about just, some of this at a cellular level, what do you feel like are the big, like, let's just talk about lifestyle factors, right? Like the baseline, the setting the standard, like what are the lifestyle factors that can be affecting our skin in such a dramatic way? I mean, you mentioned stress, which I think is, this is like this interesting underlying low level stress and how we're navigating things. Like I quite often, I did my meditation practice last night. I normally do it in the morning, but I was like blazing on time. And I sat and just had, a meditation practice, and really it was a group practice online. And it's like, I notice in meditators and people who meditate a little bit more frequently, because they are de-stressing, I think there's a bit more of like a lightness in the skin, a clarity, the eyes, like you can kind of see this like a bit more of a youthful appeal or resonance for people who are doing things like that to navigate stress. Do you feel like, what are the other lifestyle factors that are really, crushingly challenging for skin health as we're aging?
So, I mean, the obvious is, of course, like you mentioned, stress. I mean, diet absolutely has to be a key player. Exercise, even. There's even some research that I've seen that people who exercise more have, healthier looking skin, have greater, or less, I should say, fine lines and wrinkles. So the whole holistic, I mean, smoking, obviously, probably most of your listeners aren't smokers, right? But like the core things. But then, of course, there is also just like the environment that we live in. I know, in the biohacking space, there has been some concern about sunblock and, the safety of that. But the sun is the number one thing that causes skin aging. And so, again, I think it's a very personal decision on whether you choose to use sunblock or not. But at least the research that I'm aware of shows that some of the more mineral-based sunblocks are effectively blocking the UV damaging effect of the sun, but don't have some of the concerning harmful chemicals and, endocrine disruptors and all the other concerning things that are in sort of these chemical-based sunscreens. I do wear sunblock pretty regularly, especially even indoors. We're getting damage from the blue light if we're sitting in front of computers right now. So I think that's really, I just encourage people to kind of do their own homework on sunblock and what their main goal is and what are some safer choices there as well. But the environment is a huge player, especially like notice, I spend some time, I live about an hour outside of New York City. Like I spend a day in New York City and I come home and I feel like every pore is clogged. So the environment for sure plays a role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch the conversation a little bit to things going on in perimenopause and menopause and give a little shout out to that category of females because there's not enough conversation around it.
Yeah, well, I love that there is more and more conversation happening around it because, it's just a really challenging point in many, many women's lives for multiple of reasons. But in terms of skin specifically, what's happening is as our estrogen starts to decline and all of our hormones really start to fluctuate, estrogen receptors are almost, everywhere in the body, right? And that's why we, start to lose, even our cognitive ability, right? We start to get all this brain fog. We start to lose our muscle strength. We notice that we start to gain weight in our midsection. And then it shows up in our skin because collagen production then starts to decline. And it, for me, it felt very rapid. Like I felt like I woke up one morning and was literally like, why is my face droopy? Like what happened? And so there's a lot of conversation, not just around the symptoms that are happening, but around what are some of the things that women can do to support the changing hormones and to help sort of, I don't want to say rebuild, but to kind of gain back some of the functionality, like whether it's through hormone replacement therapy or, specific nutrients or herbs or, topicals like urolithin A that can help to make the skin act in a more youthful way and kind of help to counterbalance some of the changes that are happening as we go through perimenopause.
Yeah, do you also just from the supplementation standpoint, this is I think it's a critical supplement, this timeline supplement for this period of life for females, right? Because of and I know before we started hit the record button, we were talking a little bit about some of the research that's out there, but understanding what, first I always like to shout out the fact that as we're aging, we lift less heavy things because, I don't know, if you look at the actual sort of studies or landscape, we're eating a little bit less healthy. Maybe we're not talking about it or noticing it. We're working out a little bit less. It could speak to, jobs, careers, families, and all of the full plate that we have. But there's a lot of that. So I always like to remind listeners that like getting out and doing the thing, sometimes even when we don't want to, is important. And that, building muscle is such a critical part of the perimenopause and menopausal cycle to be able to, just bolster longevity and all of the wellness that's happening in the body because, muscle makes us smarter and keeps us alive longer.
For sure.
But really just speaking to the supplement, and why and how that can support not just muscle, but just this era of life.
Yeah, well, the more that I'm studying perimenopause and urolithin A, I think they really go hand in hand at this stage of life. I recently learned, over the past year, that our mitochondria actually have estrogen receptors on them, right? And so obviously their functionality is going to change if you have less estrogen circulating in the bloodstream. So the other thing, when we talked about clinical studies earlier and products and what their clinical claims are, the timeline products were done, unfortunately, women are very under-researched, especially perimenopausal women. And the timeline products in our clinicals were actually more than men were women, and both middle-aged and then older women. And so we know that we're going to see those improvements in these particular age groups. And same thing with the skin line. We're done in women of all ages, but then we also had one specific cohort where that were postmenopausal women, and we saw benefits there. So that's also the thing that's like really important. Younger skin and younger bodies act differently than perimenopausal skin and bodies, and also act differently than, postmenopausal skin and bodies. So I think it's important to know, okay, this is a great claim, but who was it done in?
Yeah, so important.
Absolutely.
Like 18-year-old collegiate athletes. We're like, awesome.
Yeah.
That's great to have the research. And also
does not apply to me, especially like 18-year-old, like collegiate male athlete. Like I was A, never that, and B, I'm certainly not that now. So, right, like my training, my diet, my lifestyle is very different. My physiology is very different. And so I think that's important. But the studies that we see with timeline are pretty impressive, even in like sedentary adults. So to your point, like menopause fatigue is a big thing, right? And so while eating well and getting out and exercising are of the utmost importance, it's also hard to do when you're really tired. And so I think one of the nice things about Mitopure that can kind of help to bridge that gap. So we see things like a 12% increase in muscle strength. That's with 500 milligrams a day after 16 weeks. And we see in older adults who were sedentary, we saw 17% improvement in muscle endurance. That was after just 2 months with 1,000 milligrams. So these are really like not, they're meaningful.
This is dosages on the bottle that people can, like, that are dosing people correctly and according to that.
Yep, correct.
That's important too, right? It's not the macro dose that's happening only in the lab that people can take this. Yeah,
exactly. So we sell it in 500 milligram doses. We have 2 different dietary supplements. They're the same cost, same efficacy, same bioavailability. It's just how people prefer to take their supplements. So 2 soft gels. They're kind of like a smaller fish oil. So they're not tiny, but they're not ginormous. Or we have these really lovely powders, which if you either like your supplement stack is huge and you don't want to add anything more and you just don't take supplements at all and don't want to, the powders mix really nicely into like a smoothie, or I actually love them in plain yogurt or like my chia pudding. They add a really nice flavor because they don't have sugar or an alternative like sweetener. There's just really just tart berry flavor. So they're really lovely.
I love it in chia. I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah.
That's a little chia pudding and I can put it in and I'm like, it's just a nice little hint of something. Like it gives it that berry flavor without like overkill.
Totally. Yeah. That's been my new thing. I put like a little vanilla protein powder. I put the berry powder in my chia pudding and it's delicious. So yeah, I'm glad you do that too.
I think it's important to highlight what you did, which is this is a Swiss-based company with just standards that are beyond precise and also just continuing to try to raise the bar. Is there anything else from just like a quality and purity standpoint that you've like seen along the way in working with them that you're like, damn, this is a pretty good, this is a whole new barometer for what we're looking at here?
Yeah, well, so, our dietary supplements are NSF for sport certified and are also clean label certified. So that's a really vigorous application process that has to be done, in order to show that A, there's not stuff you don't want that's in there and that there's truth in the labeling. So if we say 500 milligrams of urolithin A, there is 500 milligrams of urolithin A in there. I think the other thing is, if you're choosing a urolithin A supplement, there are others on the market, but the research has all been done with Mitopure. So it becomes really difficult to say like, ooh, this formulation or this brand, how they're making the same claims on our product. Is that necessarily the same? And we see that right with things like vitamin C, like liposomal vitamin C, ascorbic acid, right? Like the same claim can't necessarily go to every single formulation unless it's been studied that way, because you don't know if the bioavailability is the same, if the dosing is the same. And so I think that's just a word of caution for people who are looking for urolithin A. Mitopure is really the one that has all the transparency that all of the studies have been done. And I said before, it's truthfully why I'm here. You don't see this coming from supplement companies very often. There's a few great supplement brands out there that are doing what we're doing, but,
it's the exception, not the rule.
Correct. Yeah.
So some people have asked too, and I don't know the answer to this, but just specifically about the supplement, the skincare line. Of course, it's all like shelf stable and things like that. But is there in the window of expiration, make sure you're using it within the first year? Does it have a deterioration quality, anything like that? With the rise of like seed oils and then the fish oil conversation about things going rancid, I just want to kind of address that. I've never noticed any issues with anything that I've taken over the years with you guys, but I'm just wondering if that exists.
Yeah, The expiration, I believe, is 2 years from the manufacturing date. But there's no like rancidity that's happening. The urolithin A molecule itself is extremely, extremely shelf stable. So it can withstand heat. It is, able to go through our bodies, through our entire digestive system, and still be absorbed. But, of course, you want to just be mindful that there is a best use by date. And the skin, gosh, I should know this off the top of my head, what the expiration date is on that. But I mean, if you're using it daily, you're going to use it up.
I'm like, the expiration date is going to be gone in 30 days.
Yeah. I mean, the skin, little goes a long way with the skin, but, so it's not like you use it and it's gone in like 3 weeks, but, if it takes you 3 to 4 months to use it, like you're going to be well under the expiration date of that for sure.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And all of our packaging is really ensuring quality and making sure that there's no like rancidity or spoiling that's happening. Because one of the things, especially with our skin line, is that there aren't really like artificial preservatives, fragrances, or anything like that to mask, a potential unwanted smell or spoiling. So everything is really designed to be to keep freshness and purity and activity as long as possible.
Amazing. I love to be able to unpack all of this with you and companies like Timeline, because it just makes me feel even like I'm noticing and loving the results, and it just makes me feel even better to be able to share these things, because there's so many advertising claims, there's so much sort of false marketing lingo and all of that out in the world. And so it's just a nice to be able to have you on, discuss these things. Yeah. I want to wrap us up with 2 questions. The first one is, although we know that Timeline and the supplementation and utilizing urolithin A is a priority for cellular health and boosting our skin health for the long haul, I wanted to see if you had 2 or 3 foods that you're like, these are must-have foods to keep in your diet or to use for nourishment at a cellular level to be able to sort of boost our system.
Yeah, well, I am a big fan of berries for a number of reasons. Number one is they're just, especially like raspberries and blackberries, they're a high fiber food. And the vast majority of Americans are not getting the fiber that they need to support gut health. So just like a cup of raspberries, I believe, has 8 grams of fiber or something like that. It's huge. And then, of course, they're so rich in all these wonderful polyphenols and antioxidants that are supporting health. And they taste delicious, in my opinion. Blueberries I would throw in there. And then the other thing that I would throw in there, nuts and seeds. Again, assuming people tolerate these foods, because everyone has their own sort of individual tolerances, and there's definitely some allergies around nuts and seeds. But again, the fiber, the protein, the omega-3 fatty acids from a plant-based food, I think they're just, studies after studies show that people who incorporate nuts and seeds into their diet tend to live longer and have, more longevity, less disease. So it's hard to limit that to just
it's like
2
a
groups.
big question.
Yeah.
Just 2, but it's like healthy. Yeah,
exactly.
Optimal diet. Here's a whole podcast on nutrition.
Yeah.
I just want to like your 2 highlights. I think it's nice. I try to work different kinds of whether it be flax seeds or some Brazil nuts. I try to vary the types of nuts. I try to keep the nuts unsalted and raw. I keep them in my fridge so they're not going funny, and all of those things, which I think sometimes people come over, they're like, you got walnuts in your fridge? What's going on? Yep. But just play it safe best we can with those kinds of things.
Yeah, and you just hit the nail on the head that variety is truly what it is, right? You cannot exist on just berries and nuts, right? We need to have a new, variety of different types of different colors of fruits and vegetables, different types of nuts, different types of proteins, plants, animals, different colored vegetables. That's really the key is, we're omnivores and we are meant to eat lots of different types of foods.
Yeah. So beautiful. And then I always close with this question, which is, everybody always gives us such different answers, which I think is why I love to close with it as well, which is really, if you could go back, Jennifer, to your teenage self, let's say, and give yourself one piece of advice that is really like, hey, I want you to be able to lean into wellness and health for the rest of your life, what would that one piece of advice be for 15-year-old Jennifer?
Oh, it would probably be, I think more about long-term health as opposed to sort of immediate health. And what I mean by that is in my younger years there was just a very much a focus on, I think a lot of my and I'm sort of air quoting, healthy eating was really meant more in a way to force my body to be a way I wanted it to be, or the look away that I wanted it to be. Whereas now I'm really thinking about how I want my body to perform and to get me through hopefully the next 50 plus years. So it's sort of this shift of just like, controlling my diet and controlling how I eat for this sort of like immediate gratification, as opposed to like now really thinking about long-term health.
Yeah, and I think that's such a critical point and so beautifully said. Just speaking to younger women as well, there's so much in the landscape of women who show up to me who are like, I'm having one iceberg lettuce leaf and a rice cracker. And it's just because there is a desired outcome for a look and a feel. And I think there's other ways to do that in the way that we nourish ourselves and the way that we bring ourselves joy in life. And I do believe that most people can work directionally towards the physique that they want to have by eating well and training and doing all the things that really make them feel like robust performers. So thank you for sharing that opinion. That objective around it is understanding like how we perform is how we're going to perform for the rest of our lives. Yeah. I so appreciate you. Before we press record, I was like, I feel like I know you, and we've met before in a past life or in a New York City life, and I still feel that way. And just wonderful to have like your warm smile and your presence and your intellect with us. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise around Timeline. Timeline is posted in my shop, the notes of the podcast, all of this, because they're always have been so wonderful to me and have a discount for the audience and all the things that come along with this great podcast. But mostly you're sharing your knowledge and sharing your insights around nourishing skin health and longevity is just, I know, such a win for this audience. So appreciate the time with you today, Jennifer.
Thank you. My pleasure.